Supreme Court of the United States has reversed the orders of the Florida Supreme Court on a very narrow majority, 5 justices to 4. George, this effectively ends the election.
It has ended the election. And Peter, literally one of the closest elections in American history. 104 million Americans voted, only a 300,000 vote difference. 600 votes approximately separated the Gore and Bush in the state of Florida, and now by 1 vote on the Supreme Court, this election is over. Back in 2000, we didn't know who'd be the next president until the Supreme Court shut down the Florida recount on December 12th, 5 weeks after Election Day. And if this year's race is close, we could see a repeat or worse. The president's attacks on mail-in voting, delays at the Postal Service, concerns about coordinated voter suppression efforts among the challenges that could make this election the most litigated in history. With potential court fights across several states, the outcome unknown for days or even weeks after Election Day. We're going to keep an eye on election security all through the campaign with the help of our crack legal team, our chief legal analyst, Dan Abrams, Kate Shaw, professor of constitutional law at Cardozo Law School. And Kate, let me begin with you. Everyone wants a safe election. Everyone wants a secure election. You want the country to be confident that the election results reflect the will of the voters. So that's the goal. What's the most significant threat to that right now?
Oh, gosh, George, there are a lot of possible nightmare scenarios. I mean, you spoke earlier in the show about the possible threat of foreign interference. Obviously, some foreign powers are already working, it seems, to interfere with the election. So then I think there's a question of what exactly that interference might look like. If we're talking about, hacking campaigns or even attempting to penetrate the apparatus of elections, voter databases and rolls, those things could pose a threat to the very legitimacy of our election. Other kinds of interference, things like the promotion of misinformation on social media, they could violate the law, but any legal action would probably be too late to take any effect. And so in some ways, the intermediaries there are critical. So whether platforms like Twitter and Facebook are going to be vigilant about identifying fraudulent accounts and misinformation and doing takedowns and purges is going to be really critical. And then I think a lot of responsibility is actually going to lie with the American people, right? I think going into this final stretch of the campaign, it's going to be really important to take a pretty skeptical view of political information that we see on social media, knowing that the sources of it may not be reliable, and so taking all of it with a very serious grain of salt. But I don't think any, except for potential penetration of election equipment and systems, none of that necessarily poses a threat to the legitimacy of the election. And there's a degree of messiness, even apart from foreign interference, baked into elections, however they are conducted.
And Dan, the president has married the concerns about foreign interference with his concerns about mail-in balloting. Let me play that for a second, then come to you.
The biggest risk that we have is mail-in ballots. It is a much easier thing for a foreign power, whether it's Russia, China, Iran, North Korea. It's much easier for them to forge ballots and send them in. It's much easier for them to cheat with universal mail-in ballots.
Is that a real concern?
I don't think that foreign interference with regard to mail-in ballots is the #1 concern, or should be the #1 concern out there. Remember, when you're talking about universal mail-in ballots, let's be honest about what the issues are. Again and again, you hear people say, well, they get sent to places where no one's there anymore. They've moved, or they're not alive anymore. And those are real issues. But that's not voter fraud, right? Voter fraud, then, is the person who decides they're going to risk their freedom to take said ballot, falsify information, and then send it in. This notion about foreign powers being able to take en masse, make up names, make up signatures, make up the exact kind of paper and the rest of the security issues that come in, and for the people who are counting the votes to not recognize that those votes and those names and those addresses don't match with what they have on the voter rolls, that's a real long shot. With that said, mail-in voting is and should be the #1 concern. Not necessarily because of fraud, but because of all the legal battles we're seeing right now over how to count them. When did they come in? Did they come in by Election Day? Did they come in after? Were they postmarked? Did they have the proper signatures? It's really more a question of undercounting rather than overcounting.
Yeah, and Kate, that's what could extend Election Day far beyond Election Day. If you have close votes in the battleground states like Florida, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, the president often cites what's happened here in New York, where it has taken several weeks to count all the ballots. But it seems like the danger here is not that fake ballots will be counted, but the legitimate ballots won't be counted.
I think that's right. I said before elections, a degree of messiness in elections, and I think that obviously there were a lot of imperfections in the recent New York election. But messiness is sort of inherent. There are long lines. There are confusing ballots that are printed in confusing ways. There are delays in ballots arriving or returning on time. And more often than not, that messiness actually ends up preventing eligible and eager voters from successfully casting their ballots. So I think it's right. There is more concern about a denial of meaningful access to the ballot in this cycle than somehow some manufactured fraud or widespread absentee ballot fraud concern. But again, all of this will, I think it's right, play out after the election. So there is litigation ongoing right now, and a lot of it mostly framed around the question of who gets to vote and how. Democrats have obviously understand or believe that maximizing access to voting will be in their political interest, and Republicans in some of these lawsuits seem to be broadcasting that they believe that restricting access to mechanisms of voting will be in their electoral interest. And that does say something, I think, about the political coalitions as each party understands them. But all of that is sort of the litigation we are seeing play out now after the fact. Exactly as Dan said, the sort of debates will shift to mechanisms of counting. Some of these access expansion versus access restriction themes may play out in the post-election litigation. But it's true, if it's close in a lot of these battleground states, and in particular the states where you can't even begin counting absentee ballots until Election Day, which is the case in a number of pivotal states, I think it's very likely that we could see days, if not weeks, of counting, and recounting, and then potential litigation play out.
And Dan, I've been reading all kinds of nightmare scenarios. Let me end with one for you, that in fact, no one reaches a majority in the Electoral College by January 20th, when the term of the president and the vice president ends.
Look, I think that's very unlikely. I think that as we saw in Bush v. Gore in 2000, the courts can certainly expedite when they need to. They can basically demand and force the secretaries of state and the people counting the votes to move more quickly. And they will say to them, look, if you don't finish by X date, we're no longer going to allow you to continue to count votes. I don't see that being a significant concern. This is going to come down to, as Kate said, is it close? If it's close, there's going to be fights. We're already seeing the fights now on how the counting should occur. Once the counting does occur, you're going to see additional fights as well.
Dan Abrams, Kate Shaw, thanks very much. I'm sure we're going to be back and talking to you many times during this season. Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.